Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, Nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story. We have now arrived at what is called, is originally published, Last Born by Isaac Asimov. It's on the cover, although the cover art is from another story. Galaxy Magazine in September 1958. So, what exactly is this story in here? It is the featured novella. You can tell it's at a very early page here. Novella Last Born by Isaac Asimov, page 6. No blurbs here, as usual though. Now when you get to Last Born, as you can see, Last Born by Isaac Asimov, illustrated by Wood, and we have a small blurb. I'll explain what these pictures are in a moment. Okay. A scientific experiment or not, the patient was her responsibility, and all the more so for having died so many centuries ago. So, this story has resurfaced in other places, most notably and probably primarily, and the only place I know of among his own Asimov's own books, in the Nine Tomorrows. It's the concluding story of Nine Tomorrows. It puts a capstone on this, kind of summarizes the whole thing. It's the last of the Nine Tomorrows. And with that, in fact, the last one written as well, the last one to appear there. Meaning with this story, all of the short stories contained in his books published in the 1950s will have at last seen the light of day. Not just in the magazines as well as in the books. So this also comes at a very important juncture in his writing as a writer period. You see, he is in the very process of writing Last Born, and while this is going on, October 4, 1957 happens, and Sputnik is in the orbit. And suddenly, he feels like somebody caught up short. He realizes, I should have been writing science, fact, and helping people to know about this so we can kind of catch up and not find ourselves so far behind. The Russians have put something into orbit, and we're not even close to being ready for that. We had rockets, we were planning to, but we still had a ways to go here. It wouldn't be till the next year that we'd finally get something into orbit. Meanwhile, they will have not only put out that original Sputnik, but also a second Sputnik, which also included a living creature, the famous dog Laika. So this totally kicks him in the rear and makes him ready to say, the science fiction was fun, it was nice and all, but I really needed to devote my efforts to science fact. He'd written a number of science fact materials for quite some time, a fair amount under his belt actually, but now it was time to devote his efforts to that just whole hog, haul himself in, jump into that with both feet, and probably never look back, or at least not for quite some time. Which means that after Last Born, there will continue to be short stories, and there's still a few left in the pipeline, but things will slow down very much, to the point that by the time you're getting up to the years of 1963 and 64, he is not writing anything short story. Now, he's still getting published because you're looking at the time season where Doubleday is finally acquiring the rights to I, Robot and the Foundation trilogy, which now at last gives him a chance to profit in any way, pretty much almost whatsoever, from those books, since Gnome Press didn't really do a lot with them, and what they did do, what little they did do, he saw almost nothing of. But now, finally, Doubleday gets them. They can promote them. They can get them in all the bookstores, and suddenly those classic works are selling like hotcakes. So even though he hasn't written anything, there's still some really good publishing coming out. There is one short story that will come out in 1964, but it's not written in 1964. But hopefully we get to that here. Goal here is, at this point, this kind of closes up a very important era for his science fiction. It was something he readily did, he wanted to do, he wrote a lot of stories, and even this one, he wanted to call it The Ugly Little Boy. And in fact, in all other places, it is simply titled The Ugly Little Boy. Because this boy, he's Neanderthal, pure and simple, from about 40,000 years ago. They got some kind of a time machine stasis thing. It calls him forward in time. They can look at him up close. They can interact with him and stuff. And then when it all gets shut out, he shut down. He just zips right back to where he was, and that's what it is. And so, with this little boy, they decide, so they do get a little boy. They hire on this young nurse named Edith Fellows. Now, let's take a look at the artwork here. This is our glimpse of the place as viewed by Wood, and I think it's a pretty good indication here. So, you see the lady there standing there leaning over the railing. That is Edith Wood. The other guy there also leaning was Hoskins, and then there's another guy who's a newspaper man. Now you look below, they're looking at something that looks like a 3D house plan or dollhouse or something. In fact, they call it the dollhouse because in about 3 of the rooms there's the area where suddenly this Neanderthal child, about maybe 4 or 5 years of age, is suddenly summoned forth, and there he is, all alone in a strange and frightening environment. And right away, Edith Fellows has to do what she has to do. She runs down to take care of this child. So the child is dirty. The child is just confused. The child is frightened. Could be vicious. Might bite. You don't know what's going to happen. But she's the one who's charged with trying to take care of the child. And the idea was that partially they didn't have enough money to put on a roof, and partially they kind of wanted to make it so one could observe what's going on in there from this place. So that's what they do there. That's what's happening there. We have another picture later on. There's actually 3 pieces of artwork for this, which I think is kind of nice. We now have pictures of her as she's interacting with the child. So this is it. I'll just show her with glasses. We'll revisit that in a moment. There's also a picture of an old man that will be brought forth from the Middle Ages. This is all her, so forth. You have this nice picture in the foreground here, or background, whatever you see, where you see her taking care of the Neanderthal, this little boy. So he looks like a Neanderthal, or at least the way they expect it, kind of small foreheaded, not much jaw, stoop sort of look. The way one pictures a caveman, I don't know how true that really is, but that's the way these caveman type people were envisioned. And so it kind of, not the way you kind of want to look. In fact, some of the people at the time come to take to calling him an ape boy. That's not a very complimentary thing. It's, in fact, she protests that and will not allow that to be said in this child's presence. Well, at least not anything when she's around. And we have this problem here that not everyone follows that exactly. This is still, it's the 1950s. It was the time when you could still use uncomplimentary words sometimes. If you'd been darker skinned, somebody could have used the N-word around them, okay? These were just those kinds of times, and somebody actually called him ape boy later on in the story. But she's taking care of this child, and they get to know each other, and she's feeling, just really motherly feelings. We get motherly feelings again. We had that with Susan Calvin just a while ago with Lenny, and now we've got Edith Fellows, who's now got the job of taking care of this Neanderthal child. There's the third artwork. Ah, here it is. And there's also a time where Mr. Hoskins, he actually takes her on a little tour and shows her what else they're doing in this whole place called Stasis Incorporated. They brought forth a small dinosaur here, you see. And he's showing that to her, and she's, wow, this is very interesting and stuff. But she's kind of looking at him. I guess she's not sure whether he's married. He is. But, they're still kind of a fun thing together. And so those are the artworks that I think are kind of neat. They illustrate a lot of stuff. And I have to admit, especially the first, it kind of helped me picture the dinosaur a little bit. But picturing this dollhouse thing, really helped me envision some of the pictures that scenarios I might not have quite gotten. So she's taking care of this child. And, well, this was the story as originally intended, but it has a very different ending. And nobody would take it. Finally, Horace Gold asked for a revision, change this ending, make some changes here and there. He had an ending where the Neanderthal boy somehow sees fire, and when he goes back, he brings fire to his people, and all of history is totally, as we knew it, is wiped out, because now suddenly we have fire at a different time and place than otherwise, and we are totally changed. And basically somebody commented to him that, well, that would be like solving the story of King Edward VIII by having England, what would have happened if he could have, not abdicated and so forth. And as well, we solved that by having England fall into the sea, kind of a thing. It's not really a real way to end the story. And I guess it's an interesting piece of story advice. If you're making it sound like you're solving a problem by having the place fall into the sea and that's the end, you're probably not doing very good at writing a story. So he finally, just in anger, rather than revising the story, he just says, forget that, I'll just rewrite it. That's what he says to Horace Gold. And he goes and he rewrites it. He gives it a different ending, the ending we have now published here, and also published in the Nine Tomorrows. So now he gives it the ending that we really have, which has to do with she gets so bonded to this child that it's time to send the child back. There are events that lead to this. I won't spoil those events. The big ticket change here, and I'm going to have to bring this up because I think there's things to talk about relating to this, that it is a good story. It's kind of a bit of a tearjerker. It's one of his own personal favorites, and I think with some very real justification. Having rewritten it, he has ended up with something so much better than what he started with. That he's willing to let what he started with just fall apart, and I don't know if any copies of it exist among his papers there at Boston University, but there doesn't seem to be any interest in publishing that. So we have this, and actually he'd already stole the story to be included in Nine Tomorrows. Now Horace Gold is making him change it, and he finally decides to rewrite it. And as it turns out, he puts the rewrite both in Galaxy Magazine, as Horace Gold wanted, and he was very happy with it actually. And he also puts that rewrite in Nine Tomorrows. So they actually match, as far as I can tell, perfectly. Super, super, super close. I did see one little typo that I didn't see in the other, so it must have been fixed. So she's taking care of this boy, but they're going to have to send the boy back to the 40,000 years ago. Turns out, if you're in that area when it happens, you go back with him, or it, because they got dinosaurs and they go bring rocks and other things like that. Goes back, and she voluntarily goes back with the little boy to those times, and that's it. Now, here's the thing. There's actually a couple things that the story overlooks, sadly. One has to do with, here's a little boy who had a mother back there in Neanderthal times, presumably taking care of him, and suddenly she can't find her little boy, and in all likelihood we'll never see him again because maybe these Neanderthal tribes are nomadic, they move around, and with the little boy's gone for about 3 years in the current time, he goes back to a point in time 3 years later. So that's 3 years his own mother does not see him. So even if they found each other somehow, they wouldn't recognize. He might recognize his original Neanderthal mother. He might not. I don't know. The mother would probably not recognize him, especially the way he is and talking strangely and just unable to explain these bizarre wonders he has seen. Just a whole different time and place that is just incomprehensible to the Neanderthals. And he's learned our language. I didn't see any evidence that anybody bothered learning the Neanderthal language from this boy. Apparently it was something that involved clicks and other things. It sounds vaguely intriguing, but somehow he just kind of gradually abandons it and everyone just teaches him English and he learns the English pretty well, and finally at the end of when he's about to go, he finally calls Miss Fellowes mom for the first time, and she's like, yes, you can call me that now. You go ahead. Because she's become like a mom to this little boy. So now he's been yanked out of there. Who knows what his Neanderthal mother went through, having had her little boy just plain disappear. Not even a dead body in there. I mean, what? Some dinosaur swallowed him whole for all she knows. That's probably it. Well, probably not dinosaurs, literally, we know it. Let's get the chronology right. But some big creature. How many were that large? I mean, in the age of dinosaurs, you'd have ones that could swallow a human whole. Was there anything like that in the days of the Neanderthals? I mean, I don't know, saber-toothed cats, but, they couldn't swallow a human whole. It'd be remains, it'd be bones, it'd be something. He just disappeared. So, and then he's going to go back. Probably the tribe has moved on. They might be hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Or they might have a circuit and might even find their way back. Who knows? But here's another thing. Now, Edith Fellowes has suddenly plunged herself, and without a whole lot of advanced planning, because she was hoping to smuggle the Neanderthal boy, who, by the way, along the way acquires the name of Timmy, to smuggle him out, which would be a very huge disaster for the company because just taking him out of the stasis area where he lives can be visited, studied, interacted with, but he has to stay in there. But you bring out anybody or anything substantial from there, and you lose this, enough energy to, I don't know, power the planet for 3 weeks or something. I mean, it's just huge. I'm not quite sure how you get that energy drawn, but that's what she was actually planning. She gave him some clothes, warm clothes. I guess this was in some cooler part of the world, ready to take him out into the world. And instead, she's got him all dressed and ready to go. And all of a sudden, no, you can't take him out. We know what you're up to, Miss Fellowes. And so she just, goes back to 40,000 years with the boy. Well, now she's back there in an environment that, like I said, she's had very little preparation for. And I wonder, I mean, she's a mother type person. She's going to be motivated. She might really do stuff for this little boy back then. But it's going to be hard. And that boy, she's going to probably be almost as much dependent on the boy to try to remember, what did he do? What did you watch out for? What did the animals come? What was that growl? Ooh, where do we hide? We climb this tree. She'd have had to do this kind of stuff, learn all this stuff, learn how to hunt, find food, or whatever it is they do. And hopefully little Timmy would be able to remember what had been done there for the first 3 or 4 years of his life before he got snatched out of there and plopped in the middle of this dollhouse experiment. So there's that aspect. They didn't pay attention to his language. His mother's all brokenhearted. And nobody really seems to worry too much. It's just they yank a person out of way back when and they study the person for a few years. and then he goes back, and could even he survive? We always hear these situations with animals where you take care of a baby lion, it's sick, it's injured, it's lost its mother, there's nobody to take care of it, so you take it in, you take care of the lion, you feed it, all this good stuff. Finally, the time comes to release the lion into the wild, and maybe the lion survives, maybe the lion can't survive, just because it's been too used to dealing with humanity, or even it fails to survive because it gets out there and humanity just hunts it right up. Now at least that won't be a concern, but what will be that child and this fellow's ability to survive in a Neanderthal world? It's probably maybe there's an ice age going on. I don't know what's going on. They may find themselves extremely ill prepared, but at least they'll be together. And so maybe that's why it was when Asimov, his own little girl at the time, Robin, wanted to, finally had an interest in, can I read one of your stories? He suggested this one. It was recent, it was good, involved a child. It just seemed appropriate. It was a story about a child, pretty much. So she read the story, and she comes back all, oh, you didn't tell me he was going to be sad. And so, nice little mother-daughter closeness, and it is a bit of a tearjerker, and it's not usual in his practice to do that, but he did it here with, I think, a reasonable degree of success. Like I said, there's a few loose ends that kind of don't get addressed, and I brought those up, but it's kind of, they're still together, and he gets to be returned to the time and place. Whether he'll be able to pick up any threads of the life he had amongst the family and tribe, and Neanderthal mother he had, and so forth, and maybe even Neanderthal father. I mean, who knows? We've been able to pick up the threads of his original life, which that now is his life. It's his life for the rest of his life, whatever it is, and if he can survive long enough to hook up, or maybe he just never does, and he's this isolated being with what kind of existence? I don't know. Maybe Miss Fellows knows that she can survive. She promises to be there for him always. I was kind of worried about those kind of surprises because always isn't always. Nobody all lives forever. And indeed, even assuming neither one of them dies prematurely, the little boy is going to outlive her by however long, just because he's little and she's older. So, I don't know. It's a great story though, and it was a good, strong last. I'm writing a story. You go on to write a thin trickle of stories after this, but with his emphasis now having suddenly switched so completely to nonfiction, it's going to be just a trickle. There's still a few more in the pipeline, and then there'll be maybe a couple of little bits and pieces every year, and then kind of nothing, and so forth. I hope to be able to continue with all of those, but we are up to this point, and I'd say at least this point we really have closed off, I think, the whole era of having a very strong focus of his being short stories. He began with short stories. Some of them led to longer stories. Some of them were longer stories. We have a number of other novels, some of which I've covered already, some of which I hope to get to. The Galactic Era series, the Elijah Bailey stories. He also writes the Lucky Star stories. So there's actually a surprising amount of books I haven't even covered yet. But that's what I want to do. That's what I'd like to do after I've done what I'm going to do with the short story. Now, I hope and expect to continue with these short stories, at least for maybe a decade or two beyond this. But after a while, they kind of lose their interest. But it's kind of nice to see him gradually regain his willingness to write fiction again, which of course meets its full flower with Foundation's Edge. But in the meantime, this is what he's got. This is quite a send-off for his own fiction, and I think it's a good story and definitely one of his classics. Anyway, thanks for listening, and hope you get a chance to read it.